All right, here's one for you. Let's say we have two teams with 10 people in each team, but one team, each player, the small team, let's call it team small, they each have 10 flip of a coin each. While the big team, team big, there's still 10 players in each team, but then each player in team big gets 100 flips instead of 10. So now let me ask you this. Which team is more likely to have the player with the most heads? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. If you're new here, my name is Olivier and I'm a certified math and physics teacher in Ontario who is currently doing a master's in statistics at Carleton University. I actually got this little game from Jordan Ellenberg's book, How Not to Be Wrong, The Power of Mathematical Thinking. Pretty good book. I haven't finished it yet, but it's good so far. And if you're watching this video, you're probably going to be into these kinds of things, but it's really about the philosophy of math and how to think logically and so on, and why we're overconfident or why we might be wrong. So here, and this is all tied to this video as well. So here, did you answer team big or team small? Is it team small that's going to have the player with the highest number of heads, or team big? Well, you've probably answered this one right. It is team big, right? Because the maximum number of heads a player on team big can flip is 100. Let's say they get heads every time, then they would flip 100 heads. Whereas the maximum number of heads a player on team small can flip is just 10 heads. So that's not a fair game. So now let me ask you a second game. What if, instead of asking the raw number of flips, what if we asked which team is more likely to have the player that has the highest proportion of heads? Because they both have fair coins, right? They're both expected to flip 50% of their flips that they're going to show up heads. So now let me ask you, which team is more likely to have the player with the highest proportion of heads? So they're all supposed to be around 50%, but one team is going to have a player with a higher proportion more often than the other. So pause the video here and try to think about this one. Okay, your intuition probably told you it was team big again that is more likely to have the highest proportion, the player with the highest proportion, but you're wrong. It's actually team small. And the reason most people get this wrong, and the way I framed it might be a little bit better for you actually, because I asked you the first question, but Daniel Kahneman wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, and he argues that we have two systems of thinking. We have system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the fast intuition that we have, and basically just the fact that it's called team big, your brain is probably more likely to think it's a higher proportion. But the fact that it has more players, you think that they're more likely to reach a higher proportion. And then we also have system 2, which is the slow, logical, and it's energy demanding to think that way. So your system 1 probably told you team big, but now let's look at the system 2 answer and the math behind it. I actually wrote a whole article breaking down the probabilities and stuff, but in it I built a Shiny app, which is just a little application. So basically what I have here is I have two teams. So there's 10 members on each team. The team big has 100 flips per player. Team small has 10 flips per player. The instructions of the game are here. And the probability of flipping a head, it's a fair coin, it is 0.5. So I just hit the let it flip button and you see that we have some flips. So it's basically as though I had 10 people on team big, on team small flip 10 times, and then team big, I had 100 flips each. So that's the beauty of this, is you can actually see. And here it says that team big won this time. The best flipper had flipped heads 60% of the time. So if you look at the team small result, the best flipper is 60%, and here team big is 60%. So technically it's a tie, but in case of a tie, I gave the results to team big, and you'll see why, because it's really rare that team big wins. So for example, the first player on team big flips 60 heads, and that's 60 divided by 100, so that's 0.6. Then the second one flipped 51, and they should be all relatively close to 50, right? Because if you have a fair coin, you're going to flip around 50 heads with some variation. Now team small, however, the first player flipped 5 heads, 4 heads, 4 heads, 6, 4, 6, 4, and I'm thinking you're already starting to see that it's probably more likely to be off of 5 than it's more likely to be off of 50 by a lot. And here you see that team small one. The highest number is 7. And then if we do it again, it's actually 80 now. And then it turns out that you can do, like, let it flip and keep score of this game by running a simulation. So let's say we want to play, like, hit the let it flip button like 500 times and keep score. So team small won 4 out of 5, I think, so far. But let's say do it 500 times. And this might take a little while. So maybe what we can do while this runs is go look at the plot, which is a picture of the probabilities for each team. In red, we have team big. And on the y-axis, we have the probability of flipping a specific proportion of heads. So you see, for example, that the probability that team big flips 50% heads, like exactly 50 heads, then it's around 7%, while team small, it's 25%. So they have a lot higher probability because there's less outcome. You can think that each outcome, it has a similar probability, but they're split in 100 versus divided by 10, right? If you add all these up, all the heights of the point, it should give you 1, okay? But then the key thing in this plot is that you see at the extremes that the blue is a lot higher than the red. For a player on team big to flip 100 heads, that's almost impossible. It's pretty much 0. However, for a player on team small to flip 10 heads, it's a little bit more likely. You see that the blue dot is a little bit higher. And same thing here, 90, it's a lot more probable that someone flips 9 out of 10 heads than 90 out of 100. And that has to do with the law of large numbers. The higher your number of flips, the closer you're likely to be to your average, to your expected value. So now let's look at our head-to-head simulation. We have that the team small had a higher proportion of heads, 477 times out of 500 games. So that they won 95% of the time. And from my experience when I ran this simulation more, they win about 95% of the time. So even though your brain probably told you that team big had a better chance of having a higher proportion, you can see clearly for yourself that team small, the game is rigged for team small. It's so much more likely to flip 8 out of 10 heads than it is to flip 80 out of 100 heads. And I wrote this in my article. And when you compute the probabilities, it's actually a lot more likely. It's something like 4 billion times more likely, or 10 billion times more likely to flip 8 out of 10 than 80 over 100. So that's a pretty cool stuff. All the links to the code are in the article. One cool application of this concept is, let's say you're looking at cancer rates in Canada or the United States, and you ask yourself which state is more likely to have the highest rates of cancer. Well, almost when you do the research and you run the numbers, almost without fail, it's the states with the smallest population. Now your system one could tell you, it's because smaller population, they live more in a different way or whatever. But it might just be a mathematical explanation, right? There is, let's assume that there is an equal probability. Well, a state with 1,000 people of population, and let's say the default cancer rate is 10 in 1,000, it's a lot easier for a state to be off, right? Let's say they have a bad year and they have 50 over 1,000, while they have 5 times more cancer rate. But let's say you have a bad year in a state with 10 million people, well, like to be off by 50 people, that's not going to change your percentage by that much, right? Like a one person in a low population changes your percentage quite a bit, but one person in 10 billion doesn't change your percentage that much. And sometimes in school you see the same thing, and for the provincial testing in Canada or in Ontario, for example, the schools with the least number of students have more variance. So if you look at the blue and red curve that you see on the screen, two schools can have the same average. That's the middle, the big hump on these curves. But the bigger school will have less variance, right? Because you have more kids. And then that's like the result from year to year will be closer, it will be more stable because there's more students and they kind of average each other out. That's a lot of large numbers. And then a school that like 1 year you have like little classes of 10 students, and then they perform really badly for whatever reason, well then that's going to shift your average. So your average from year to year is going to change a lot more. And which schools are more likely to have a higher result, a more extreme result on the right? Well, you see that the red curve is way above the blue curve, right? But small schools are also more likely to underperform the province average as well. They're just more variable. But if you look at only the top schools, you're probably going to have a lot of small schools in there. So that's one cool application. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification to get notified of all new videos. The best way to currently support the channel is just to share this video with anyone who you think might be interested. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time with Do the Work.